Hello everyone, I'm Isaac Lilaker. Some people come to my channel because they like to hear the messianic perspective.
5:53, they declared Mary to be semper virgo, ever virgin.
Not just when she became pregnant with Jesus, but even after that and for her entire life.
And people don't like the fact that I'm listening to the Catholics. The thing is, the Protestants don't say anything about her. And I know that Dr. James White is too harsh with Catholics. But on this topic, there's a reason why he's upset.
They are not saying that it's possible. Normally that's the argumentation.
In Catholicism, this is church dogma, which means that every Catholic has to believe it. Highest level of objective, absolute truth.
You are cut off from salvation. You are anathematized if you do not believe this dogma. What it sounds like it means. If you think that it does, you're a heretic.
I haven't been getting my information from James White. I've only discovered him recently. I've been taught a lot by this guy.
I grew up the first half of my life as an Irish Catholic boy, pre-Vatican II Latin Catholic in some cases. There are many Catholics who love Jesus and are Christian brothers and sisters. We would disagree with them, being Reformed Evangelical Protestants, on some points.
And he doesn't have anything to do with James White. He has been taught a lot by D.A. Carson. I'm not particularly a follower of James White either, but there is something he said that I did appreciate.
I point out that there is a sad disjunction between the synagogue and the church. Horrific attitude that developed between the two led to an unfortunate ignorance of the Hebrew Old Testament, especially with Origen's allegorical interpretation of things that came from that.
And that wasn't necessarily true at the beginning, but it is true that later on, when some subjects, including Mary, it was done outside of it. So let's dive in. The first thing we talk about is the fact that Jesus has brothers called James, Joseph, Judah, and Simon.
And also mean kin or relative. It's used that way in the Septuagint. Lot and Abram are described as...
In the Masoretic text, it says people that are brothers. They're not blatantly calling each other brothers.
The Epiphanian Eastern view of this, brothers and sisters of the Lord are children from Joseph's previous marriage. You can hold the Western Jerome.
Mother of James was the wife of Alphaeus and the sister of Mary the Lord's mother, the one who is called by John Mary of Clopas.
And Hegesippus says that Clopas is Joseph's brother. So these would be his cousins. The debate is usually around the scene at the end of the... You see various people gathered around the cross. So let's synchronize them. In the Gospel of John it says Mary his mother's sister Mary, wife of Clopas. In Matthew it says Mary, mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. Mark says Mary, mother of James the younger and Joseph. This would be the only time, by the way, that this lady appears.
Clearly this is different than the Virgin Mary, Jesus' mom, or they would have said that.
Well, I think they were only mentioning which living children she had at this point. If you look carefully, it is trying to emphasize at this point that Jesus has died. It's also these same four women that go to the tomb.
It's unheard of in ancient Palestine for younger siblings to correct their elders.
Publicly.
Basically telling him he's out of his mind, he shouldn't go to Jerusalem.
Actually, they're not the same passage. There it says his kinsfolk came to apprehend him. His brothers aren't really rebuking him, they're embarrassed by him, and they're secretly, basically telling him to go away in the form of an encouragement for greater things.
This was the one that did me in years ago as a Protestant. Is in Galatians 1:19, James, the brother of the Lord, only two Jameses that are apostles, James, the son of Zebedee, and of Alphaeus, refers to him as an apostle.
He's not saying James is an apostle. He says he didn't see any apostles. The only person he saw was James, the brother of the Lord. He isn't called an apostle anywhere else in the Bible or in history.
There's also the passage that says that Mary and Joseph did not have relations until she had given birth.
Right, Matthew 1:25.
Does not mean a change after that point. There are so many other examples, the Greek New Testament and the Septuagint.
But this is how I stunned myself when I was reading the verse. It seems to me that what it was saying, the way it was said and what it was saying, it did mean that. I learned Greek by habituation. I'm not learning from systematicians.
With not just heos, but heos who?
See, the u after the eos, the English na. It's a bit like you're saying you're not having that before you haven't done that. And it's only afterwards that I saw this.
That in Matthew, each time did indicate change in the action thereafter.
Everyone in the early church who wasn't a heretic, shout out to Tertullian, believed in the perpetual virginity of Mary.
And he might have written De Carne Christi while he was still Orthodox. So shall we read this passage, because it's going to bring down the house. Christ's nativity was never in question. If he had to be tempted about his birth, this was not the proper way to do it, by announcing people possibly not existent. More probable that he had a father even than a mother, and uncles more likely than brothers.
He also provides a defense when it comes to Victorinus by saying, look, that is wrenched out of context.
Well, I think there's been some confusion. There are two people called Victorinus. There's Victorinus of Batavia, and there's Gaius Marius Victorinus. Shall I read his quote? It's going to bring down the house too. Why would Paul choose not to call her a woman? Every female who gives birth is called a woman, because Mary is, or was, a virgin. And it's supposed that these views were held since the beginning. Jerome is used as the source for this.
We don't find as explicit defenses of it, but it's possible Jerome had access to their writings that have now been lost.
Look, we only have a few letters surviving from Ignatius of Antioch.
And then I was wondering, maybe Jerome was actually saying something else. Let's look at the phrase again.
We are leaving the fountain of truth, are following the tiny streams of opinion. Might I not array against you the whole series of ancient writers? Ignatius, Polycarp, Irenaeus, Justin Martyr held these same views, and wrote volumes replete with wisdom.
So it seems to me that he's actually saying that the views that they held were the main fountain of truth, especially since we have their volumes written against these people who were attacking the main fountain of truth.
Helvidius was an Arian. He was taught and trained by Bishop Bonosus.
I didn't find any evidence for this. What I've heard is that there's a bishop of Milan that was an Arianist, and it's possible that Helvidius was trained by him, and we're not sure. And the Bonosians are Arianists, but we don't know about Bonosus himself. I dropped the fact that I thought that their view came from Gnosticism, because I know Hippolytus of Rome also said ever virgin. It also made me think maybe ever virgin used to mean always a virgin in the past. Because in a lot of the ancient quotes, it's often said in that context.
Let those, therefore, who deny that the Son is by nature from the Father and proper to his essence, deny also that he took true human flesh from the ever-Virgin Mary.
And Basil of Caesarea says, it does not run counter to faith, because the virginity of Mary is important for the conception of Christ, but not after. And I thought that it came through Clement and Origen, because they both use one of the Gnostic Gospels, which is the earliest source, and even today Catholics are cozying up to it.
It's fascinating. It's called the Protoevageleon of James.
Sometimes called the Infancy Gospel of James.
But that doesn't mean they aren't witnesses to what early Christians did believe. I would call it Christian midrash, Jewish genre of retelling, but they're underscoring the main points of the canonical narratives.
Well, I would know what that is, and Trent Horn impressed me. He's very smart. Even James White respects him. Still, I disagree with him.
It's not to promote Gnosticism, it's to counter Docetism.
Docetism is a name that was given by Serapion of Antioch to the Gospel of Peter, meaning the illusionists. And I know that this is the Gnostics producing this, because they're the ones who are making the forged gospel. They're trying to trick up the Christians. Seem to be the deceivers who came out of the world, who deny that Christ came in the flesh.
It's not a Gnostic text, a Syrian, Antiochian.
Clement of Alexandria, who's from the relevant region, calls it the gospel according to the Egyptians.
Alexander and his successors, the Ptolemies, ravened for knowledge.
9 canonical lyric poets, Olympia and Delphi, and tragedies. The Athenians, the Iliad, Plato.
The influence of Greek philosophy on the dualism of a man named Plato.
But the person I found who's best described the Gnostics is someone who used to be in the New Age.
Is to find this true spirit self. Anything material is evil. Your body, things you can see. Through acquiring knowledge of this, that one can free themselves from the material world.
See a Christ of the Gnostic Gospels, the Nag Hammadi library. I see a Christ as a state of consciousness that we can all aspire to. So we read the Gospel of Thomas, which none of you seem to even be aware of. The Gospels. Christ was not a corporeal resurrection, but a spiritual resurrection.
Yes, but no time to be messing around with this kind of thing, because as you can see, our detractors keep using it.
Each subsequent telling adds more and more supernatural elements, like a talking giant cross.
Infancy Gospel of Thomas. He makes these 12 sparrows, and when he's accused of violating the Sabbath, and brings them to life.
According to Irenaeus, there was a Gnostic called Basilides who said, the gods who created the things in the world came to kill the people, and so the one who's supposedly the god of the Jews sent his son, the Christ, and he exchanged his place for Simon of Cyrene, and exchanging their appearance, Jesus laughs. And those who thought it was Judas Iscariot, the Gnostics of today, they need to check up their fallacious sources again. You can tell they were just as diabolical before. This is not midrash. And I'm not suggesting that the Christians got had by the Gnostics. I'm saying they did. In fact, the earliest indications of the existence of their documents is when you see one of the church fathers quoting them by mistake.
Justin Martyr accepts as gospel the story of Jesus being strong like a giant to run his course around the world. What was he reading back then?
And in Demonstration of Faith, Irenaeus by accident quotes the infancy gospel of James.
It's a proto-gospel because it's actually the gospel before the gospel, the miraculous birth and upbringing of his mother Mary. And what's driving the account is, why her? This is the first time, by the way, you get the account of her riding on a donkey.
What are the names of Mary's parents, and how do you know that? That historical
Directly
detail
from there.
comes.
When Samuel's mother Hannah is experiencing childlessness, she vows the child, Samuel. Mary's parents, St. Joachim and Anne, were infertile.
Remained a virgin, that she was consecrated as a virgin in the temple.
And the first account in which Joseph is declared an old man,
saying there was a light, and then the child appeared.
The silent Ben-Hur is born in a cave, based on the story.
Give it as Christians at the time confronting this hard teaching that they're trying to explain or express.
It's a framework for understanding early Christian attitudes.
Trent, what a great point you brought. Number of points you brought up, really, really good ones. I look at Origin, or don't tell you, well, I believe it because of that document.
Clement of Alexandria, who's the one who taught Origen, says he was ravaging around, and he says it is preserved in the Gospel according to the Egyptians.
Jewish culture, it was sort of obvious based upon their situation of her carrying in her womb God in the flesh. Common Jewish interpretation of scripture at that time, where Moses did not have sex with his wife Zipporah after experiencing God seeing the burning bush.
Yeah, I've never heard of that. I did once hear a legitimization of Jethro taking Zipporah away from Moses' divergence of calling. But what does the head rabbi say about that? And whoever Helvidius was, what we know is that he was accusing this monastic asceticism, possibly pointing his finger to Nag Hammadi.
So the goal is to just die and leave this body behind. And so they said that whatever happens in the body, marital intimacy is bad. And that's not a biblical thinking, but it became a prevalent view among many. Tertullian and Ambrose, they preferred the extinction of the human race to continued marital intercourse. Gregory of Nyssa said that Adam and Eve had no sexual desire, that there was a special tree in the Garden of Eden that if Eve ate it, she would get pregnant. That's how they would make babies. Origen allegorized the Song of Solomon and castrated himself.
And actually, my real underlying reasons why I don't believe in this doctrine is because of the same thing that Lizzie Answers thought at first.
Wow, why do you hate? Should, it's their right. Literally what I used to think.
Whether I think that Mary would have done this? No, of course not. She's a godly Jewish woman.
The song that welled out of Mary's heart. You're going to hear echoes as well of 1st and 2nd Samuel, Deuteronomy, Job, the Psalms, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Micah, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah.
According to Paul, she wouldn't be supposed to be doing this.
You might be interested to note this as well. The Jews would, at Passover every year, read the Song of Solomon. It was part of their annual calendar. Jewish people would get together and actually sing the songs.
And for those who think, well, 1 Corinthians wasn't written yet, I know of another passage she would be aware of.
I have bathed my feet. How could I soil them? I don't think that's a great excuse. You're a queen living in a palace. Double entendre in the Hebrew. You can read it in Isaiah. There's cross-references. I'm just teaching the text. But my beloved had turned and gone. You ladies need to know this. Men tend not to fight with their wives because they can't win.
And finally, when I was going through the early church writings, there was something else I was hoping I would find.
I preached on Mary a few years ago, and a guy came up to me afterwards. He said, "What are we talking about Mary for? We're not Catholic."
The incredible parallelism that we find when we read about Mary as the new Ark.
The Ark of the Covenant dwells for 3 months in a particular individual's house. Mary dwells for 3 months in the house of Elizabeth. David says, how does that the ark of the Lord should come to me? Elizabeth says of Mary, how is it that the mother of my Lord comes to me? David leapt before the Ark of the Covenant. John the Baptist leaps before Mary. If you were not the high priest and you touched it, he was struck down.
Struck down.
And also, the high priest was only one man at a time. And this also could come around together, Mary and Joseph being faithful to each other.
There are many Protestants who actually supported this doctrine. In fact,
Martin Luther, Francis Turretin,
Calvin, and
Zwingli.
Wesley, even 200 years later, right?
What?